You didn't grow up with the internet, but you also didn't grow up without it. You remember Saturday morning cartoons with no remote control. You remember the first time a web page loaded, slowly, painfully, over a dial-up screech that sounded like a robot having a breakdown. You're not Gen X, too optimistic for that. But you're not a millennial either, too cynical, too self-reliant, too done with participation trophies. So what are you? There's a name for you. A micro-generation that psychologists are only now beginning to take seriously. People born between 1976 and 1985 who experienced something no generation before or after them ever could. You had an analog childhood and a digital adulthood. That single fact rewired your psychology in ways most people never stop to examine. Why do you feel comfortable both alone and in a crowd? Why do you adapt faster than Gen X, but burn out harder than millennials? Why do you carry a strange, quiet nostalgia for a world that no longer exists and probably never will again? But here's the question that cuts deepest of all. Why do so many Xennials feel like permanent outsiders, never fully belonging to any generation, any culture, or even any version of themselves? We'll get there. But first, let's understand what actually happened to you. The last generation to have a childhood without witnesses, before smartphones, before social media, before every embarrassing moment could be filmed, uploaded, and live forever. You had a childhood that existed almost entirely offline, which means it existed almost entirely in memory. Your mistakes faded. Your awkward years weren't documented. You were allowed to become someone new without the internet holding a permanent record of who you used to be. Psychologists call this identity fluidity, the ability to reinvent yourself without the weight of a digital past. Xennials had it in abundance. You failed, forgot, and moved forward. That built a particular kind of resilience, not the fragile confidence of someone who's been constantly validated, but the quiet toughness of someone who figured things out alone, in the backyard, with no GPS and no Google. That's not nothing. That's actually rare. The adapter brain. When technology shifted, fast, aggressively, repeatedly, Xennials didn't panic. They adapted. Not because they were born into technology like younger millennials, but because they had learned how to learn in an analog world first. Cognitive scientists call this transfer learning, the ability to apply skills from one domain to a completely new one. Xennials had built strong mental models in the physical world, navigating without GPS, memorizing phone numbers, problem solving without a search bar. When digital tools arrived, those same mental muscles translated. You weren't intimidated by the new. You'd already mastered the old. That gave you something pure digital natives often lack, the ability to function when the system fails, when the app crashes, when the Wi-Fi dies, when the algorithm breaks. You improvise. You always have. The emotional middle child. Gen X is famously skeptical, detached. They watched institutions crumble and responded with irony and emotional armor. Protect yourself before the world disappoints you. Millennials were raised with a different message. You are special. You matter. The world will accommodate you. That created optimism, but also fragility when reality didn't cooperate. Xennials got both messages, and neither fully. You inherited Gen X's skepticism. You don't trust easily. You're not waiting to be rescued, and you have little patience for performative positivity. But you also carry a millennial streak of genuine idealism. You want things to be better. You just don't quite believe they will be. Psychologists call this ambivalent optimism, hoping without fully believing. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to explain to people on either side of you. Because you're not cynical enough to give up, and not optimistic enough to fully commit. Xennials carry a very specific kind of grief. Not for a person, not for a place, but for a pace of life that no longer exists. You remember boredom, real boredom, the kind where you stared at the ceiling and your brain was forced to generate its own entertainment. You remember waiting for a letter, for a show to come on, for a friend to maybe show up or maybe not. You remember the physical sensation of not being reachable, of being genuinely, completely alone with your thoughts for entire afternoons. That world is gone, and you're one of the last people alive who knew it as normal. Research on nostalgia shows it isn't just sentimentality, it's a psychological anchor. It tells you who you are by reminding you where you came from. For Xennials, that anchor is attached to something unreachable, a world your children will never know, a version of life you can describe but never return to. And that creates a kind of quiet mourning that never fully resolves. This sense of loss, of being between worlds, of never quite fitting, it points towards something deeper that we haven't named yet. Something that explains not just the nostalgia, but the whole pattern. We'll get there. The identity tension. When someone asks you what generation you're from, what do you say? Most Xennials pause. Some say Gen X. Some say millennial. Some say they don't really fit either. And that pause, that hesitation, that's not confusion. That's an accurate self-assessment. Identity is partly built through group belonging. We locate ourselves in relationship to others, our cohort, our cultural moment, our shared reference points. Boomers have Woodstock. Millennials have 9/11 and Harry Potter. Gen Z has TikTok and climate anxiety. Xennials have two sets of reference points, one analog, one digital, and full membership in neither cultural club. You're old enough to remember life before the internet as the real world, young enough to have built your entire adult identity inside it. That split is not a minor biographical detail. It is a psychological fault line that runs through everything. How you relate to work, to technology, to relationships, to your own sense of self. So, back to the question we started with. Why do so many Xennials feel like permanent outsiders, never fully belonging to any generation, any culture, or any version of themselves? Here's the answer. It's not a comfortable one, but it is a freeing one. You were never meant to fully belong. Not because something is wrong with you, but because you are the product of a genuine historical rupture. The world literally changed mid-childhood. The values you were raised on, the skills you built, the pace of life you internalized, all of it formed in one kind of world. And then, almost overnight, a different world arrived and asked you to continue as if nothing had shifted. You adapted. You always do. But adaptation is not the same as belonging. Psychologists who study liminality, the state of being between, describe it as deeply uncomfortable, but also uniquely generative. People who live in the threshold don't just belong to one world. They understand both. They can translate between them. They carry something others can't, the lived memory of a before and the hard-won fluency of an after. That feeling of being an outsider, it's not a wound, it's a vantage point. You are, in a very real sense, one of the last humans to have experienced life at full human speed, and one of the first to have survived the acceleration. That is not a gap in your identity. That is your identity. The question isn't why you don't fully belong. The question is, what do you do with a perspective that almost no one else has? If this resonated with something you felt for years but never had words for, drop it in the comments. You're not alone. And if you want more psychology that actually explains you instead of just categorizing you, you know where to find it.